Need help tightening a loose chain? I'm Nate with Electrix Moto, and this is E-Moto 101. All right, let's dive right in. First of all, what tools do we need for this? So you have your axle nut right here, and you have these tensioners for the chain right here. So you want to make sure that you have the proper size for your axle nut. This is a Surron Ultra Bee, so this is a 27 millimeter. This is like a combo tire spoon / wrench. I like this because this is what I take on the trails. Also recommended to use like a big socket for something like this. If you don't have that, you could use something like a crescent wrench. And these are some combo wrenches that I own. So the locking nut on this is a 14, and then the tensioning bolt is a 10 on this bike. So this might change on your bike. You might have two 10s, you might have a 12 and a 10, something like that. Typically it's around that range though. We're gonna start by breaking this axle nut loose right here. This should be pretty tight. Righty tighty, lefty loosey. I'm gonna go up on this. We don't need to go all the way. We wanna make sure that we can freely move the wheel back and forth, but it doesn't need to be completely out. So I can actually go just a tiny bit tighter than that. And now on each side, I wanna make sure that I break loose this kind of locking nut here. So like I said, this is a 14 mil on my bike. I'm gonna move it right as if I'm threading out this way. Just gonna take that loose, and we'll do the same on the other side. All right, now that that is all loose, what we're gonna do is we're gonna slowly start backing this out. So I'm gonna pull this bolt out, and what that's gonna do, it's gonna drive it toward the blocks back here, and that's what's gonna tighten the chain. So you'll see that you have these little indent marks on the side right here. This helps you determine if you're even on both sides. So both sides of the swing arm are gonna have those, and it allows you to know, okay, my chain is about as tight as I want. I want to ensure that the left and the right side of the wheel are lined up properly, so the wheel is traveling straight. Okay, so I'm going to evenly pull this out, one step at a time. While I'm going, I'm just checking the tightness of my chain as I go, so I have quite a ways to go here. Just backing this out. We're getting closer now. I'm gonna make sure I even it out on the other side. And what you'll find is, if it feels good on the right side where the chain is and you start backing it out on the left side to match it, typically you're gonna get maybe a little bit too tight. I'm in a good spot here though. Okay, so I'm slowly making my way out here. I'm actually getting a little bit too tight on the chain. So I'm gonna go back in, relieve that. As I'm going, I usually just like using my wrench that I'm using just to check the tension of the chain. There is a measurement that's recommended for most of these bikes. I believe this bike is maybe like 20 millimeters, which you can measure from the inside right here. But typically on this bike, I usually kind of go by feel. The reason why you want to make sure you have slack in this chain is if it's too tight, as the suspension collapses or as you're riding, there's too much tension on the bearings in, say, your jack shaft or your wheel or anything like that. It also can start wearing on your sprockets. So you want to make sure you have enough slack in that to the point where you're not damaging bearings or your sprockets, but it's also not too loose that you're skipping gears. So that's getting pretty close. Right now I want to make note of where I'm at. So I'm going to go based on the back of this block right here, because that's kind of the most in alignment. Pretty good amount of slack there in the chain. That won't be too sloppy for me. I give it just a little bit more slack. So I'm just gonna go in slightly, kind of do that evenly on both sides. If you're doing these kind of smaller changes, you just wanna do about the same kind of rotation on each side. Check the chain again. Okay, this is looking a lot better. I have a good amount of slack in the chain right now. Like I said, you can check your manual to make sure that you're at the right distance. So you can measure it up here. Now what we need to do, before we start tightening these locking nuts down, is we need to make sure that the axle is tight. So one thing that's a little tricky with that is that it's hard to both tighten the axle nut and also ensure that the wheel is moving into these little tensioner blocks that we've just done. So here's a little trick for you. Use a rag or even the wrench you own. and just wedge it in between your chain and one of your gears. And what this does is it puts tension on the chain and it pushes the wheel forward. So now we can tighten the axle up. This is typically a lot of pressure that you want on this. If you're using a torque wrench, typically this is around 100 foot-pounds. This wrench isn't the easiest for it, but that'll do. Now, I have that wrench sitting over there. Just spin the wheel forward. And now we have our two wrenches. I have my 10, I have my 14. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure that the 10 is a little snug up against the back block here. I'm gonna finger tighten the inside locking nut. And I'm just gonna make sure that locking nut is tight in place so none of this moves. All right, we'll do the same over here, making sure that we're snug up against the back block and hold that in place. Snug up your locker. That's it, pretty simple. 3 tools, a rag if you really want it. The chain's now in spec. It's not going to do any unnecessary damage to the bearings or the sprocket. Just remember, if you get a new bike, if you put a new chain on your bike, that chain is going to stretch the most in that initial kind of period, the first few rides that you're going to do. So make sure that you're really paying attention to how loose your chain is getting then. You don't want your chain to fall off. And like I said, you don't want to do any wear. So you might be wondering, Nate, I don't have a stand like this. What am I supposed to put my bike on? The cheapest option could be like a 5-gallon bucket. Those are usually like $3, $4 at a hardware store. You could use a tree stump, milk crate if you have a small bike, whatever. Anyway, that's it for this video. Hope you learned something, and we'll see you in the next one.